The rain struck the pavement like a warning, sharp and insistent. As if the sky itself wanted to silence what was about to be spoken. Neon lights flickered against the wet streets, fractured into uneasy reflections that disappeared beneath every passing car. In the middle of this restless city, one story sat waiting to be told, a story no one wanted to hear, and yet a story that refused to stay buried. Her name was Maya Johnson. To most, she was just another face in the crowd. A 26-year-old journalist with more stubbornness than money, more conviction than safety. But to those who would soon come to know her name, she was the woman who chose to speak when silence was safer, who chose to write when erasure was expected, who chose to defy power knowing the cost would be her own peace. This is not the story of comfort. It is not the story of success neatly packaged with applause and awards. It is the story of risk, of pain, of defiance in the face of systems that thrive on fear. And it begins on a night when the rain fell like judgment and the city's shadows grew longer than ever. Inside a cramped newsroom, Maya sat hunched over her desk, pen scratching against paper with a fury that seemed to fill the room. She had uncovered something bigger than herself, documents, testimonies, truths woven together into a tapestry of corruption so vast that it poisoned every corner of the city's leadership. Developers displacing families, police erasing lives, politicians selling futures for profit. It was all there, black and white on the page in front of her. And she knew, with every passing second, that what she held in her hands was dangerous. Not dangerous because it was false, but dangerous because it was true. The silence outside her office was thick, suffocating. Her editor had already warned her, "Don't publish this, Maya. Not here, not now." But something inside her rebelled against the thought of holding back. She could already hear the echo of the mothers she had interviewed. The pain in their voices when they said, "Nobody listens. Nobody cares." Maya leaned back in her chair, staring at the headline she had scrawled across the top of the page. She refused to stay quiet, and paid the price. The pen slipped from her fingers, but the decision had already been made. Morning broke with the kind of gray light that makes everything feel uncertain, suspended between day and night. Maya carried her draft across the newsroom floor, the weight of each step matching the heaviness of what she was about to do. Her editor sat behind his desk, glasses perched low, scanning through her words, with the kind of expression that gave nothing away until the very end. Finally, he looked up. His face wasn't admiration, nor pride, it was fear. "Maya," he said, his voice hushed as though the walls themselves were listening. "This can't run. Not here. Not in this city. Do you understand who you're accusing?" Her throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "That's exactly why it has to run. If I don't write it, who will?" He shook his head slowly, sliding the paper back across the desk as if it were on fire. "You're talented, Maya. You have a future here. Don't throw it away on a battle you can't win. These people, these men, you don't stand a chance against them." For a moment, her resolve wavered. The newsroom felt smaller, the air heavier, like the walls themselves were pressing in. But then she thought of the families she had spoken to, the mother who clutched her son's photo until her hands bled, the father whose voice broke under the weight of silence. She saw their faces, and she remembered their pleas. "Don't let them erase us. Tell our story." Maya gathered her notes, her eyes meeting her editor's one last time. "Then maybe I don't need a future here," she said softly. "Maybe my future is telling the truth, no matter the cost." That night, in the dim glow of her small apartment, she uploaded her story to an independent site. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling with both fear and conviction, before finally pressing publish. The words spread like wildfire. Within hours, the story was shared across social media, whispered in classrooms, debated in cafes. For the first time, people in the city were speaking aloud the truths they had buried in private. The silence that had blanketed the streets began to crack, and Maya's words seeped into every corner where fear had once lived. But with each share, each repost, each conversation sparked, the danger grew closer. For in a city built on silence, truth was not just inconvenient. Truth was treason. The first sign that she had crossed an invisible line came not from the news itself, but from the shadows that began to follow her. One evening, as Maya walked home, the air felt different, charged, watchful. Her heels clicked against the wet sidewalk, echoing too loudly in the emptiness, and behind her, a second rhythm emerged. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, matching her pace. Her pulse quickened. She turned a corner, her breath tight, her mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was nothing, maybe she was imagining it. But then she heard her name whispered low. so low it crawled across her skin like ice. When she reached her apartment door, a note was waiting. It was short, written in heavy black strokes that bled into the paper: "Stay quiet, or pay the price." Maya held the note in her trembling hands. For a long moment she stared at it, not with fear, but with something sharper, almost defiant. She had expected this. Maybe not so soon, maybe not so clearly, but she had always known the path she chose was paved with threats. And still, her resolve did not falter. The next day, the newsroom buzzed with murmurs. Her editor called her in, his face pale. "They're coming after you," he said, closing the blinds as though the sunlight itself could betray them. "The mayor's office, the police, they're saying you fabricated evidence. They're building a case to ruin you." Maya's jaw tightened. "Let them," she said, her voice steady. "The truth doesn't vanish because they bury it. The evidence is real. The voices are real. And no matter what they try to do to me, they can't erase that." But the machinery of power was already grinding forward. Late that night, red and blue lights painted the street outside her window. Sirens wailed, and before she could catch her breath, the door burst open. Officers swarmed her apartment, their voices sharp, their hands pulling her into cuffs as though she were the criminal. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as Maya was dragged into the flashing lights, the rain soaking through her clothes. Cameras snapped, headlines were drafted, and within hours the city's papers blared the story. "Disgraced reporter arrested for fraud." And in that moment, the truth teller became the accused. The cell was cold, its walls painted in a shade of gray that seemed designed to drain hope from anyone who entered. Maya sat on the narrow bench, her wrists aching from the tightness of the cuffs that had only just been removed. The silence in the room pressed against her ears, broken only by the faint hum of a flickering light above her. She closed her eyes, replaying the chaos of the arrest. The jeers of reporters, the flashing cameras, the officers who wouldn't meet her gaze. In the outside world, she was already guilty. They didn't need a trial. They only needed headlines. Hours turned into days, and still no official charges were filed. It wasn't about justice. It was about humiliation, about breaking her spirit before the truth she carried could reach anyone who mattered. When the guards passed her meals through the slot in the door, they wouldn't speak. When she asked about her lawyer, they smirked and walked away. But even in the darkness, Maya's mind refused to surrender. She thought of the families who had entrusted her with their stories, of the mothers who had cried in her arms, of the children who had whispered their truths when no one else would listen. Their voices echoed in her memory, louder than the silence of the cell. She couldn't abandon them, not now. On the fourth night, a visitor arrived. A figure she hadn't expected, Daniel, a fellow journalist from another paper. His expression was grim as he sat across the glass divider, phone pressed to his ear. "They're trying to erase you," he said. "Your articles are gone from the archives. The evidence files have disappeared. And they've already lined up witnesses to testify against you." Maya's grip on the phone tightened. "Then you need to tell the story, Daniel. If I'm silenced, someone else has to keep it alive. Promise me you won't let them bury this." He hesitated, glancing around as if the walls themselves were listening. "You don't understand, Maya. They're not just after your career, they want to destroy you. If I get involved, they'll come for me too." Maya leaned forward, her eyes burning with determination. "Then let them. If they silence us all, the world belongs to them. But if even one voice refuses to stay quiet, their power crumbles." Daniel didn't answer. The silence between them spoke volumes. Cumulative word count, 1,668. Days blurred into weeks. But whispers about Maya's arrest began to leak beyond the city's control. At first, they were small, social media posts questioning the official narrative. Grainy cell phone videos showing her being dragged from her home without a warrant. Then came the testimonies. A waitress shared how she had overheard officials plotting in the mayor's private dining room. A janitor leaked a discarded memo hinting at fabricated evidence. Piece by piece, the puzzle Maya had tried to expose began to reassemble itself in public view. From her cell, she caught fragments of it, guards muttering under their breath, reporters shouting questions as she was escorted to hearings. And then one morning, when the cell door creaked open, a lawyer stood waiting. Not the one she had requested, but someone new. "My name is Evelyn Carter," the woman said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm here because people believe in your story. They've raised funds, organized protests, and demanded your release." Maya blinked, stunned. "They're listening?" "More than listening," Evelyn replied. "They're marching in the streets. Hundreds. Soon it will be thousands. They call you the voice they tried to silence." For the first time since her arrest, Maya felt something stir inside her chest, hope. Not the fragile kind that shatters with disappointment, but the stubborn kind that grows stronger under pressure. Court proceedings began, and the city's officials expected an easy victory. They arrived with rehearsed accusations, smug smiles, and stacks of forged evidence. But Evelyn dismantled them one by one. Documents proved tampered. Witnesses contradicted themselves. And when the waitress and janitor stepped forward, trembling but resolute, the courtroom buzzed with shock. Yet the greatest moment came when Daniel walked in. He hadn't promised her anything that night behind the glass. But here he was, carrying a box of files. He set them down before the judge. "These are copies of the records they erased," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "I kept backups. I couldn't stay quiet." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maya looked at him, tears burning her eyes. For once, she wasn't alone. The trial was far from over, but the tide had shifted. The walls built to contain her truth were cracking. And through those cracks, light was beginning to pour. The verdict came on a rainy afternoon. The kind of day when the sky itself seems uncertain. The judge's voice echoed across the courtroom, steady but lacking its usual authority. "All charges against Maya Thompson are hereby dismissed. This court recognizes the evidence presented and finds no grounds for further prosecution." Gasps, then applause erupted from the gallery. Protesters outside erupted into cheers that spilled through the courthouse windows like a flood of relief. Maya sat motionless at first, her body numb from weeks of tension. Then Evelyn squeezed her hand, grounding her in the moment. She was free. But freedom was not the same as safety. As Maya stepped into the sunlight for the first time in weeks, she saw the cameras flashing, the microphones thrust forward, the questions shouted over one another. She could have walked away, could have hidden, could have chosen silence now that she had been given a second chance. But that wasn't why she had endured. She raised her voice above the chaos. "They tried to silence me because I spoke the truth. But the truth doesn't belong to me, it belongs to all of us. If they silence one, they silence many. If one of us speaks, they can never silence us all." Her words rippled outward, repeated on news broadcasts, written in headlines, shared across millions of screens. She became more than a journalist. She became a symbol. And symbols are harder to erase than people. In the months that followed, investigations were launched. Officials were forced to resign. And new safeguards were demanded by citizens who had once been afraid to speak. Maya didn't lead them, she reminded them they had voices of their own. Yet the price she paid was real. Her career was scarred, her reputation forever marked by the smear campaign. Some doors would never open for her again. But others, doors she had never imagined, swung wide. Universities invited her to speak. Organizations asked her to lead. And young reporters saw in her a model of courage. Late one evening, sitting at her desk in a modest office provided by a non-profit, Maya wrote the closing lines of her next story. She paused, staring at the words, her reflection faint in the darkened window. "They tried to break me," she whispered to herself. "But all they did was prove why the truth matters." And with that, she pressed send.